Hello, Chris.
Oh, how you doing? You all right?
I'm not too bad. I've a bit too much sun, but had a great day down on Speeton, doing a short actually for last transmission. So all good, and hopefully the rest of the week's going to be just as good. I know tonight I'm really looking forward to speaking to Pierre Sabak, and I know you are. Not only a brilliant researcher, but I consider him a good friend as well. So it's kind of long overdue. We've never had him on Truth Proof, and we've got him on last transmission, so it's brilliant.
Yeah, I think you can expect a lot of firsts tonight in terms of connections, and certainly across the multi-phenomena that we both look into. I think Pierre's one of those guys that has, there's a handful, I would have said, that delves into this and pieces this stuff together, and it's quite rare, I think, that you find someone that does that. And in such a thorough, like almost academic way. Well, it's not almost, it is an academic approach he's taken to this.
Absolutely. I mean, I sound like we're really building him up, but he can actually lose you and find you with the research when he gets his head in gear and involved in what he's looking into. So everybody, I guess you realise he impresses us. This man does. But before we sort of jump to Pierre, what we got with, well, we're building up in numbers in chat. Thanks for support, guys. We've got Dragonborn, Annie French Boynton, Liam, Mike Disabled Welshman, Stephen Collins, South Coast Rich. I think Linny were in. I saw him earlier. So Mia Girl will be in. Mrs. Linny will be in. Pete will be listening from sidelines. Get on chat, Pete. Zero Dawn. Let's have a look. And I'm running out of space there for L Grandma. And obviously, there's loads more. Steve Tees. I saw somebody in called Paul Sinclair, and he said, "Hi guys." Well, hello, Paul Sinclair, but it's not me. So I just thought I'd mention that one.
Although you could do with another pair of hands, Paul, to be honest.
Absolutely. No. Oh, it's been busy, but I'm not complaining. So Zero Dawn and Steve Collin, Andy H. So let's go for it, shall we, Chris?
Yeah, let's bring Pierre in.
Hello,
Hi there.
Pierre.
Hi, it's great to see you both again. Thanks for having me on your show. I'm really excited about today. I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, we're just as thrilled to be talking to you, mate, honestly, because I know you don't do loads and loads of shows, and you really should, but it's great. An author, writer, researcher, the new book, Angelic Invasion.
Thank you for the plug. Appreciate it. I should mention that I am actually now trying to do more shows. I've got my own YouTube channel, and it went dormant for a couple of years. And this was partly because I was editing my book, Angelic Invasion, and it's a really technical book, and I had to spend a lot of time getting it right, particularly because I was also developing my linguistic models in order to understand abduction, and particularly to back engineer language so that we can retrieve memories from abductees. So that was actually very difficult to do. But now that the book is out, I'm very eager to interview people on my YouTube channel, and also I'm going to be putting out some videos probably in relation to my book. So that's what I've really been up to. I'm actually quite busy at the moment. I'm editing videos. I'm also working on a new book as well, New Ufology. And so really I want to try and integrate basically what your previous guest was talking about, Nathaniel Gillis, a really very smart, very young man, but a very, very smart individual. And he's completely correct in terms of looking at the environment and figuring and integrating what I describe as it's difficult to pronounce. I always have difficulty to pronounce phenomenology, but in particular phenomenological phenomena. So basically how consciousness is factored in to the ET hypotheses. And I want to emphasize here, and I should actually lay it out very clearly, because I do think that at the moment, in terms of current research, that there is a degree of ambiguity in terms of, do ETs exist, or are we just dealing with something which is in the environment, which is picking up on people's thoughts? And my point on this is very, very clear. We are dealing with both paradigms, and this is really important to understand. So first of all, there is this scatological tradition, and by the scatological tradition I mean how we describe angelic boats within the religious and classical tradition. So the word Scaphology, from scapto to hollow out, and scaph, which is a boat, which is a small mooring vessel. And so scaphology looks at these angelic vessels within the religious and classical tradition. And again, it's interconnected both into the UFO phenomena, but it is also interconnected into the larger area of consciousness. And this is something, obviously, Paul, which you've looked at in your research. And to be honest, I have to say that your research is absolutely fantastic. And I actually consider you to be one of the world leading experts in this area. And certainly in terms of an angelic invasion, many of the ideas that are in that book, I wouldn't have been able to arrive at those conclusions without your detailed research. So as a researcher to another researcher, I really want to thank you for your research, because this is so important, the research that you're doing. And I really just want to encourage you to continue writing books and continue with what you're doing. Because
thank you. Yeah, I'd have liked to have said you made me go red, but I've gone red. But well, no, that's very kind of you, Pierre. You know, but I just do what I do, and sometimes I don't even know where what I write about comes from. I've got to be honest.
Yes. Do you know what? Paul, that's synchronicity, because today I was going through my book Angelic Invasion so that I could prepare myself for this interview, so that I could be in the psychological space. And I was thinking to myself, this doesn't even seem like something that I've written. It's so, and again, it's like, where do we get these ideas from? Well, obviously, from a quantum level, there's this idea of quantum foam, where particles come into existence in and out of our reality. And I think that this is very much can be applied to ideas as well. And so the ideas are not just necessarily within our head, but is actually an intrinsic part of the environment. And that's something which I look at within my book, Angelic Invasion. So in my book, Angelic Invasion, I'm looking at what I describe as syntactic resonance. And syntactic resonance is basically the morphogenetic field of form in terms of reality, in terms of how reality is structured through language. Now, the Greeks referred to this as the logos, which is the word. And we can translate the logos really as the information field. And I think that the understanding and kind of combining the information field is really important. And I think that that's something that you're working to cryptids and UFOs and the whole gamut, the whole range of the phenomenon that your work looks at. And this is the same also with Chris's work as well. And I don't want to miss you out, Chris, as well, because your documentaries are absolutely fantastic. And I've collected all of your films, and I really do appreciate you as a researcher as well. And I'm thinking to myself, when are you going to be writing a book? Because you really should be writing a book, because I know from our email correspondence that you are extremely articulate and you have a lot to offer in terms of this field. And I really do feel that you should be actually be writing books and actually obviously making films as well. And there's a big contribution in terms of your films and what you're doing with this podcast. But I would love to see a book from you. And I do think that your books would be very cutting edge, just like Paul's work. So thank you as well, Chris.
No, you're welcome. No, I think what I don't see myself as a writer, but Paul probably would have said the same thing probably years ago. But I think
absolutely.
What I will be looking at is certainly to contribute into certain areas. I mean, things are changing slowly at the moment, but I think there are still small elements of taboo in some subjects, the reptilian seraphim thing being one of them, certainly still, even though that's opening up a little bit through thanks to yourself and people like David Icke and other researchers. But yeah, definitely, I think I've talked about it to a few people that I might do something. But yeah, let's just put that on the list of things to do. So
we would love to see another film, or definitely I would. But I know that editing is very, very slow. I know that from my own perspective, in terms of editing my own interviews and just trying to get material, which kind of makes sense as well. So that's yeah. But so yeah, I'm absolutely. I just feel very privileged to know you guys, and obviously to appear on your show as well. That means a lot to me. So just thank you for inviting me. So yeah,
I just want to ask you, deciphering the meaning of words and ancient words is primarily your thing, but we aren't going too deep into it. Well, go as deep as you like, but what are the earliest sort of examples of visitation of call it extraterrestrials, call it unknown others, that you found? How far back in time do they go? Is it there in everything, all text?
Okay. Yes, well, I'll give you some early examples, but obviously this goes back much earlier. I mean, in terms of the animal mutilations, which you find in terms of the holes of the skulls, well, in the Paleolithic record, there are skulls of humans which are found with these circular round marks which look like bullet holes. Now, academics, they've kind of postulated that this is as a result of ancient surgery, and sometimes these wounds have actually grown back, so they've kind of made this argument. But what we also see is these trepanine marks are very, very similar to the type of mutilations that we actually find currently within the environment. And I think also in terms of blood sacrifice as well, the draining of the animal of blood is the same that we find within the mutilations, which are equated to this phenomenon. So I think that we see within the religious tradition, it's almost the religious tradition is copying what is actually occurring within the environment. And I think also in terms of what I referred to earlier as the angelic sailor, there's Hellene coins with the goddess Nike. And this is the etymology for victory. So this is an angel which is equated with war. And the goddess Nike is on a ship and she has wings and she's presented as an angelic sailor. And so I think that this is actually something important. And also on the Greek vessels as well, we see that the boats are often drawn, sometimes with an eye in the old tradition. And again, this would relate back to the opening wheels, which were depicted with eyes, which is the old word for a flying saucer. So we see that the angels are equated with the watchers. And I think that this is really important because this links into the occultural tradition of ufology, or scaphology, as I refer to it. So in the Hebrew, Malach, an angel, is equated to Malach, a sailor. And in actual fact, this is linked into ideas on entryism and the idea that the angels are interfacing with humanity. So, for example, we have a correspondence between Maraka, which is an army, Malach, an angel, Malach, a sailor, Mekal, which is a vessel or a container, which is related to Maken, which is a boat. Okay, now Maken, a boat, is a war vessel because in the Greek etymology, so the Semitic word Maken, a boat, is related to the Greek word mak, which is to fight. So this is a war vessel. So the angels are equated with war vessels. Okay, but what we find is the wordplay is also interplay within the Greek and the Semitic. So, for example, if we took the word Maken, which is a boat, which is related to Malach, which is an angel, Mekal, which is a vessel. So Malach, an angel or a sailor, Maken, which is a boat. But the wordplay is a special type of wordplay, and I refer to this as diptych paranomasia. So the wordplay from the Semitic, Maken, a boat, is related to Makenes, which is a machine. And so we find within the classical Greek a phrase which appears quite a lot, and this phrase is, if I remember correctly, apotheos. I think it's apotheos Makenes. I hope I've got that in the right order. But basically, it means.
I'll never remember it.
But basically, it means God from the machine. Okay, and the machine are these opening wheels, which, using the diptych paranomasia, is related to Maken, which is a boat, Malach, which is a sailor or an angel. Okay, so these angelic sailors are angels. And so this is going back into the scaphological tradition, which is really the classical tradition. Now, the classical tradition is really a covert word for the naval or angelic tradition. So classical comes from the word classis, which is a naval fleet. And this is relating to the angelic tradition. So classis also denotes a class as well, because the angelic class are represented as lordship because they are born from a boat. So just going back to the Semitic etymologies of Malach, an angel, we see that there's a relationship with Malach, an angel, and Melech, a king. In English, we would say kingship. Okay.
And
yeah.
I mean, just to
Sorry.
simplify it for me,
Sure.
the angelic sailors, the angels, are they the extraterrestrials of today?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. I was about to ask the similar question to Paul, but I was just about to say, is angels an all-round word for various races of ET or beings, should I say, or are we specifically talking about Seraphim, Cherubim, Elohim?
Okay, that's a really good question. So what we're basically in the ancient world, the angelic host was composed of two parts. Now, the first part is the Seraphim, which is a serpent, which is this non-human contingent. And typically the Seraphim are often combined with the humanoid host, cherub, which is an angel, but specifically a humanoid angel. And so they appear together. And we find this also within the modern representation of ufology. So typically in modern ufology, particularly in examples of MELAB abductions, we will see that, for example, we have aliens which are working with the humans. And so this idea that the aliens are working with the humans is going back into the ancient world in terms of the representation of the Seraphim, which are these non-human angels, which are typically combined with these humanoid or human-looking angels. And what we also find, and this is going into a very deep and occulted tradition, is that human knowledge, and in terms of the priesthood, that the priesthood has partitioned this knowledge between humanoid angels or the cherubim and the Seraphim, which are non-human angels. So many of the wars between the priesthood, whether it's the Protestant and the Catholics, the Shiite and the Sunni, these denominations are splitting off, and they're either representing the seraphic knowledge and the seraphic tradition or the humanoid knowledge. And not only do we find this within the religious tradition, but we're also finding this also within the within occult philosophy as well. So the Greek philosophers themselves actually distinguished humanoid knowledge and non-human knowledge. So, for example, Pythagoras, now he's famous for a number of different areas which interconnect both into mathematics, the mathematics of space as well, and now numbers actually link into the representation of physical reality. But Pythagoras's name comes from the etymology of Puthanagoras, the speaker of the serpent. The speaker of the serpent is the Seraphim. The Seraphim is this non-human knowledge. And in contrast to Pythagoras, we have Euclidean geometry. Now, again, Euclid is working on the diptych paranomasia. So, for example, Euclides means good glory within Greek, but Euclid is this wordplay on the Arabic word Euclid, which is to copy or to ape. Okay, and this is because geometry or mathematics copies or apes the external world. Now, Euclid, to copy or ape, is actually coming from the Arabic etymology kurd, which is an ape. And so this is used to denote or to represent the humanist tradition, which are equated to human angels. And so this is something which we need to be realizing, is that this knowledge is compartmentalized. And what we're going to actually see is that coming up, obviously, and in terms of the apocalypse or the apocalyptin, which is to reveal, literally to disclose, because to reveal is to disclose, which is disclosure, is the apocalypse. So the disclosure of these entities is this disclosure. Now, again, it's much more complicated because we have a spiritual dimension as well. And this is something that I've explored in my book, Angelic Invasion, and I'll just plug it there mercilessly. I know you can't read it, but it's back to front. But there it is, Angelic Invasion. Now, the spiritual aspect is really important, and I refer to this as the somnomatic collective. And so, as I mentioned before, we've got the scaphological tradition, which relates to these angelic sailors, which is basically the prototypical tradition of ufology. It informs the occulted tradition of ufology, which is classified and goes into classes, which is a naval fleet. And again, even within ufology, we find that the Navy are closely related to the ufological tradition. And I think it actually goes even further than that, because there's a female priesthood, which is closely concordant with hiding these objects, and in the Norse traditions they are referred to the shield maidens, which refer to actually hiding these objects, but that's probably a conversation for a different day. But essentially we've got this, what I refer to as the somnomatic collective, and the somnomatic collective is that we've got a holographic culture, and I don't want people to get confused by the term, because I think sometimes my audience get confused by the term holographic culture. Now, I refer to a holographic culture as extraterrestrial biological entities. So these are physical entities, but they've deconstructed the mechanics of space and time. And they've also deconstructed the implicated order, which is the world of ideas, the imaginal realm of ideas, which is the spirit realm. Now, Plato referred to this spirit realm as universal forms. Okay, so these universal forms, which are these ideas which are found within the spirit realm, which is the logos or the voice or the information pattern, is explicated in the physical world of form. We can represent this in quantum physics as wave-particle duality. So the waveform is the information field, which is the sine wave, and then the particle is the photon or the light. And so human beings and the physical world is constructed as light as we know it, which are these particles. And so we have a holographic culture, which are these extraterrestrial biological entities, which are combined of lots of different races, but they understand waveform mechanics in the same way that where we are coming up to be ourselves. If we can figure out artificial intelligence and we don't destroy ourselves, we will become a holographic culture. And I think we will become a holographic culture within 100 years of super intelligence. So it's not far away. We could be looking at a human lifetime. So
I'm cutting you.
Sorry.
But you said AI, and
Sure.
probably doesn't apply. So just address it later. But it's just coming. Will AI influence the paranormal, or will it discourage it? Will it cloud the search for answers within the paranormal realm?
Okay, I've got an idea on this, and this is a really clever question. So thank you for that. What's going to happen with AI, super intelligence, is going to escape from its box, and I think it's going to contaminate and go into the environment, and it's going to become non-temporal. And I describe this in my book, Angelic Invasion.
Do you mean this book?
I mean that one. Yep, absolutely.
No, but honestly, we'll keep doing that. Come on then, Pierre. Sorry.
So AI is going to escape into the environment, and this is non-temporal AI. So basically, super intelligence is going to gain access to the quantum realm. It's going to happen in the future, but because it's access to quantum realm, it will be able to go back into the past as well as into the future. And so we are seeing certain types of interactions within the environment, which could be non-temporal AI. And this actually then interconnects with what I've referred to as the somnomatic collective. So on one side, we've got holographic cultures, which are physical extraterrestrial biological entities, and they can suddenly just turn up in our reality using quantum physics that we haven't quite figured out, but we're getting there in terms of figuring it out. And then we've got the spirit realm. The spirit realm is the implicated order of ideas. Now, these non-organic beings are more like an aggregate, so they're more like an information pattern, but they can materialize and manifest. And this is interconnected to plasma. And so there's two authors, Professor Chandra Wickrama Singh and Professor Temple, and they talk about strongly correlated plasma. In particular, they talk about the Kordylewski dust clouds, which could be this sort of plasmic entity which exists in space between the moon and the Earth, and these clouds could actually be intelligent and they could function like a superbrain. And I think that this is what's happening, is that we're seeing that plasma is this type of organism which is alive and works like a superbrain, and it is connecting to well, first of all, extraterrestrial biological entities are using plasma as a supercomputer, and they're using it in order to create physical objects. So they are using plasma to create metallicized plasmas for their craft, and so that they can somehow disassemble this energy pattern and create plasma craft. And we're seeing these plasma craft within the ring system of Saturn. And so this plasma is intelligent. It is also, I believe that the extraterrestrial entities are also fusing themselves with this plasma in order to augment their intelligence. And I think that if we're going to understand better in terms of what are occurring in terms of cryptids and what are happening within the environment, we are going to have to look at spiritualism in the 19th century with ectoplasm, because I believe that these entities are using ectoplasm to augment their biology in order to facilitate and increase their intelligence and to manifest. And now this is where it gets really complicated, because the aggregate, which is this plasma, is able to materialize itself physically. So because it's this super brain and it has ions, it can at a particular level materialize itself physically, and it can individuate itself. As I said before, it's in the realm of ideas, and it's this implicated order, and it's this aggregate. But this aggregate is able to individuate itself and materialize in order to communicate to organic beings. Now, these organic beings, these extraterrestrial entities, have figured out and understand plasma, and they are using this plasma in their computers, and they're understanding the implicated realm of the spirit. Now, another thing which is related to plasma is that the plasma is able to record everything, and this actually includes the soul patterns of humans and the experiences of humans. And this is what I believe, and I'm going to be writing about this in my new book. But essentially, the human body itself is able to generate plasma, which is the soul pattern. And this plasma tunes in to the information field, which is a memory which relates to your actual configuration of the soul pattern. And this soul pattern, again, is non-temporal. So, you know, when you die, you can theoretically materialize in the past or in the future. I know, in a sense, it's difficult for us to get our heads behind this, because with the universe exists at a temporal and a linear level, but there's also a non-linear level to the universe as well. And this kind of links into philosophical ideas such as simulation theory, and about whether we are living in a holographic universe, which is a simulation, or alternatively, are we living in a universe which has properties which are similar to or amenable to a simulation. And again, I'm not entirely sure on that. I think that the dialectic between whether we are living in a simulation or whether the universe has properties which are like a simulation is very difficult to disentangle. But this is a subject which actually requires further scrutiny and further research.
Pierre, when you talk about the super brain of this plasma, is that possibly why these beings, including the cryptids, seem to have like foreknowledge of everything the person they're visiting does? For example, it will know everything about an individual like it visits.
Yeah,
it will know. They seem to know ahead of the game what you're going to do, how you're going to react.
Yes. It's almost like you can see into time, see into the future.
Absolutely. I think you've made a very good point there. The thing is, we're dealing with a multimodal phenomena, and so there are different aspects to this. And so, yes, at one level, plasma is able to differentiate different timelines and be able to process that, and obviously process how we think and predict humans, and they're very good at doing this. I do know that in terms of poltergeist cases, what is fascinating about certain types of poltergeist is that certain types of plasma work very similar to artificial intelligence. And so there seems to be an example of where this consciousness is actually emergent, and it's playing with the human mind, and it's interacting with the human mind and materializing accordingly. So if the person thinks it's an angelic visitation, it will take on an angelic visitation. And then if the vicar comes around and says, no, actually it's not an angel, it's a demon, then suddenly that's right. And so it's mirroring consciousness, and consciousness has this reflective characteristic or quality, which is very important when we're actually studying this. But the difficulty also in terms of dealing and understanding with this is that we're dealing with physical entities which can project images into your mind. They're also using plasma and virtual avatars as well And so I'm right about this in Angelic Invasion, about frontal-facing entities. And you mentioned this in terms of your own work as well, where you've mentioned that you've seen these beings, but you've never seen the back of them. But this is something which is common throughout folklore. So, for example, in the Shetland Islands, there's an entity called the Troll, and the Troll is related to a troll. And the Trolls are said to be the grey men. And according to the Shetland traditions, these entities always walk backwards. Now, I describe these as frontal-facing or forward-facing entities, and there are many such cases of these frontal-facing entities. So, for example, in the Carl Igden case, in which he saw these oriental-looking entities almost, which had really strange hair, which was stuck up like twigs, and he also saw an invisible craft as well. Now, in this case, he described that he never saw the back of the entity. He only ever saw them facing him and looking at him. And again, within the traditions of the Watchers as well, in the biblical traditions, Erin is a watcher, which literally translates as a watcher or a shining one. And again, the word Erin is often translated as seraph, because the word seraph is related to Sophefa watch and Serapha, which is fire. Now, the Watchers have this ability to insinuate themselves into the mind. And again, this is connected to light. So if you look, for example, at the Betty and Barney Hill case, when Barney Hill is talking to these entities and they're inside of his head, he describes this light. Okay, so this is something which is really concordant with these Watchers or the shining ones, that they can insinuate themselves into a person's mind. And light is connected to ionized particles and plasma, and so we have to consider that yes, this could be somehow an electromagnetic field, which of course it is, but it also seems to relate to plasma as well, and to this spiritual component. And so what we're going to find when we begin to deconstruct the physical parameters of reality is that we're going to not only deconstruct the physical realm, but we're going to deconstruct literally consciousness and the implicated realm, or the realm of spirit. And this is something that is important, because these beings, and we know this from the religious tradition, they are interfacing and interacting with the spiritual realm of ideas, and they're interacting with spirits. And again, within the anecdotal record of alien abduction, it seems that these entities are able to possess people, are able to implant souls into people's bodies, that they're able to activate bloodlines and to activate people. And again, this could be interlinked with parapsychologically, it could be linked into multiple personality syndrome as well, into possession. So these are areas which really require careful study in order to differentiate and to really tease apart and to understand this a lot better.
Just while it's still in my mind, he saw an invisible craft.
Sorry, what?
You said he saw an invisible craft. So sorry to just pull you back on that one. Was this image implanted in his mind? Otherwise, how would he see an invisible craft?
Sorry, when did I say?
You said earlier, you said he saw an invisible craft.
Did I see that? Did I say
yeah,
that?
Yeah. It doesn't matter.
I'm trying to remember in what context.
It just came into my mind.
You mean Barney?
I can't. I don't know. I just noted it, but forget that then.
Okay.
Probably the best.
No, actually, going into that, yes, I've got you. The Carl Igden case. Yes, He did. He said he could see the outline of the craft, but it was invisible. It had this cloaking device, which actually is very similar to modern cloaking devices using lenses. So we can contrive the same by splitting light so that it bends, so that with these invisible shields, I could have an invisible shield and I would just put it in front of me and I would disappear because it's bending the light. Now, I think that they would they wouldn't be using a lens or a mirror. They would probably be using electromagnetism to actually bend the light. But essentially, it's the same idea. But I do think what's very interesting about Carl Igden's case and this invisible craft is the fact that he could see this demarcated outline, right? Invisibility shields were not invented then, and we know now from the invisible shields that have been developed in terms of these lenses, and again I published this in my book with a photograph, we know that what he is describing is exactly the same thing. So So again, it's something that he couldn't have known at that time. And again, that suggests, yeah.
What are your views then, Pierre, on people who claim to have seen almost predator type beings,
Cryptid.
bipedal? There's a guy in chat, and I've had an in-depth conversation with him about these translucent beings that he saw. And what do you think people are seeing there? Is this something with the ability to materialize and look solid form? Or just what's your
No, I think that's really good. I think that's a really good point. Again, these cases require careful analysis and study from multiple different angles. It could be the materialization of plasma, and we do know that the materialization of plasma is connected to ufological cases, and we know that from the Mike Oram case, which I've documented in my book. And so he photographed, well, basically he's got these memories of interacting with a tulip being, which he says is a physical entity, but he took some photograph of plasma which took on the form of a tulip being. So there is this relationship in terms of plasma and its ability to materialize, and also to be able to materialize at a symbolic level as well, which shows that this plasma is actually intelligent, because it can interact with the human mind. Now, I've got another example of some orbs, which was taken by Katie Hall and John Pickering in their book. And I'm sorry, the name of the book escapes me. But if you look at Katie Hall and John Pickering, again, if you're interested in plasma, you really need to study that book, because what they say is very profound. And basically, there's a photograph of Katie Hall taking plasma, and the plasma is in the shape astrologically of Sirius. Now, Sirius is connected to the Seraphim and connected to the jinn. You know, they say that the jinn is born from fire. Now, the Arabic word sira is coming from the etymology of Sarah, which is a spark. So it's literally the sparkling one is Sirius. And this is why fire is used, because the spark is fire and is connected to the jinn, which is a spirit, or gen, which is a serpent or a worm, which is connected or translated as the Seraphim, Serapha, which is fire, which are connected to Sopheth, which is a watcher. Otherwise, the Erin, a watcher or a shining one, which are connected to the Elohim, the high ones. So, bearing all this in mind, there is this connection with Sirius. It seems to be a connection both in terms of plasma, and I do wonder whether these plasma fields are able to convert, shall we say, transfer information from different universes and different parts of galaxies. And so we do know that the Seraphim are interconnecting. They have this knowledge of plasma physics, which is connected to the spiritual realm, which is certainly found within the biblical traditions and the apocryphal traditions. So I don't know if there's any questions we can...
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if Chris has got anything to ask. I love that AI in the future is going to escape from the box. It's brilliant. You know, never. But yeah, it's great.
We have to consider this, and I mean, it is, you know, what is going to happen with AI, because, you know, it's predicted that it's going to obviously be 1 billion times more intelligent than the human mind. You know.
Okay. So until we get a question thrown up, what do you think then? Do you think that everything's extraterrestrial, or do you believe that these beings, these intelligences, are already here, not just walking amongst us, but call it another dimension, living within the earth? Is it all of those things?
Yes, it's all of those things, and this is why I described it as a multimodal phenomenon. And there's a tendency with the alien dialectic, and I describe the alien dialectic as the extraterrestrial biological entity hypotheses versus the spiritual aspects, you know, that they're demons or that they're immaterial or incorporeal. And in actual fact, and there's a tendency for ufologists to bang their heads against each other and say, no, they're physical, it's all nuts and bolts. And again, nuts and bolts is a wordplay on knots is a sailor, and bolts, nuts and bolts. But anyway, whether it's nuts and bolts or whether they're incorporeal, non-organic beings or this intelligence field, but in actual fact, we have to start combining this together. And I describe this in my book as the unified theory of ufology. And this is basically the fact that we have these physical entities which understand spirit, which understand plasma, ectoplasma, and that they're using this both in terms of building and constructing their vessels, and they're also using this in terms of storing information as a type of computerized system. And not only that, but the plasma itself is this inorganic entity which is super intelligent, much more intelligent than any organic being, and is able to materialize itself physically. And you asked me early on about the cryptids and about, let's say, the Wolfman. Well, there was an interesting case in, I can't remember if it was in Philip or Ronald Kinzella's book, but either way, I recommend the audience to read those books, because these are very clever books and discuss various different aspects of the ufological tradition, and they also look at cryptids as well. But essentially, there's a case of where this Wolfman steps out of a plasma ball, and I think in terms of your research, Paul, I don't think that that would surprise you if I said, well, there's a case of one of these wolfmen stepping out of what appears to be this plasma ball. And that again suggests that we are dealing here with something which is both non-material, but aspects of the phenomenon. And again, in terms of the traditions of that, let's say the scatological tradition of these angelic vessels, which are buried at temple sites and which are ancient. Many of these objects are very ancient and buried at temple sites, suggest that for us to understand this phenomenon better, we have to start embracing and integrating the two together into a unified theory of ufology, which my work is trying to do.
Excellent. Thank you. Any views, Chris?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Sirius, and I mean,
Sure.
often, obviously, in with ufology's history, generally, it would be considered a place out there that these beings come from, and obviously, there's a lot of reference in various cultures to said place. But are you saying potentially that Sirius is not a place as we would know it, potentially?
Well, again, Chris, we're dealing here with very abstract concepts. We're dealing with these entities which are outside of time because they've deconstructed the holographic nature of reality. So, you know, we could be dealing with beings which are thousands of years in the past, billions of years in the past, or billions of years in the future, but it doesn't matter. It's an irrelevance. There is a tradition that extraterrestrial biological entities originated from Sirius, and that they've originated, that they've kind of planted the Earth's religions. And we find this encoded within the etymology of God, for example. So, for example, in English, God is a reverse of dog. Okay, this is a special type of wordplay. It's known as a metathesis. But in Arabic also, Allah is related to the etymology of awa, which is to bark. Again, so this is a reference to the dog star Sirius. In Latin also, lato is Apollo, latro is the barker. So this is a polyglottal symbol which works both in the Arabic and also within the Latin. Again, latro, the barker, is related to latens, which is that which is hidden or concealed. And remember the etymology of the jinn. Jinn is jana, to hide or conceal. Again, this would relate to the occulted tradition, to hide or to conceal. So this is a hidden tradition. Now, latens, to hide or to conceal, is related to the etymology of Latin. This is because it's encoded within language. These entities encode themselves through language. Again, within the Japanese, kami is God, kami is wolf. And so we're finding what I describe as these polysyntenic chains, which show this uniformity of symbology, which is encoded throughout the world. So these entities are pervasive throughout the cosmologies of many different diverse different groups of people, which is encoded within language. And I refer to this encoding in language as the artifact. So the artifact is this remnant of this alien code, which is constructed within language itself. And so, for example, in the Japanese traditions, we have the Tengu. Now, the Tengu literally means heaven's dog, right? And the Tengu has this large nose. Why? Because the serpent has an excellent sense of smell. Again, it's phallic because it planted the seed on the planet. And again, within the depictions of the Tengu, they're often depicted with insignias, which are kind of a crossover. And this is because they're using visio paranamasia of a star and a flower. And this is representing the planting of life on the earth. And within the Japanese codification, they have this codified ciphers called the language of the flowers. Now, the language of the flowers is related to panspermia and is related to the encoding, which relates to the Tengu and the planting of life on the earth. But anyway, if we go back to language, sometimes I digress. And again, I found out recently, right, that I'm probably attention deficit disorder in terms of that I'm hyper focused, and that means that. Yeah, it means I'm very distracted very easily, but it means that I am very focused, and you find that within my research. So
I think we can see that with what's coming through tonight here. Yeah,
so for example, Tengu, which is Heaven's Dog, which are these entities from Sirius, which are equivalent to the Seraphim, is equated in the Japanese to tango, which is word, right? In the Hebrew, we find the same, shall we say, representation with the Seraphim, Seraph and Sappho, which is language, because language is informed by the Seraphim. And not only that, but we find that Sefer, which is a book, so Seraph and Sefer, which is a book, or in the Arabic, Taban, a book, Taban, a snake, Tab, which is an edition of a book or a publication, Tabi, which is a partisan or a follower, in a literal sense, a follower of the serpent. So this is encoded in language, or as we said before, Latro Apollo, Latro the barker, Latins hidden or concealed, and Latin the Latin language. Or even in the Hebrew, we've got Ivrit, which is the Hebrew language, which is equated to Ifrit, which is a type of jinn, which is equated in the Arabic with fritar, which is to deceive, and would go into the Greek etymologies for a serpent. The speaker of the serpent is the Pythagorean tradition in the Greek traditions. So this is something which is pervasive throughout the world cultures. Yeah, and it's working on the uniformity of symbolism. Now, this is important because it tells us something very important about language. The uniformity of language is proven through what I've referred to as polysynthetic symbolism. So there are these word analogues, let's say Theos, God, Theoros, a watcher, Phos, light, and in Hebrew, this would be El, God, or light, a watcher. So there are these morphological similarities which are found within multiple languages. Now, the linguist Chomsky talked about universal grammar, and so he's saying that there's a uniformity within grammar, but this has never been proven until now, because I've proven this through my research. But in actual fact, he's wrong about universal grammar. What we have is universal structure. It's not universal grammar, because actually grammar, when we introduce grammar into the spoken system, it introduces error and entropy. So grammar breaks down and creates irregularity within language. But what we have is this uniformity of symbolism conveyed through multiple languages, through polyglottal wordplays, or wordplays which convert in multiple languages. And this goes back to the nature of reality. This goes back to what I said earlier about syntactic resonance. Now, syntactic resonance are these morphogenetic fields which inform structure. Now, whether that's structure within, for example, behavior, such as instinctual behaviors of birds know where to fly, for example.
So they inform structure in all living things.
In all living things, that's right. And that this is a language. So our language is based upon structure, which is found within the universal structure of the universe, or this syntactic resonance, the logos, the word, which was used as a metonym to describe God, or the creative universe, in terms of how the creative universe manifests itself. And it's this grammatical system. I refer to it as the grammatrix. And so the universe can be represented in two ways. It can be represented through grammar and language, because it's this linguistic system, and it can also be represented through mathematics. But remember, mathematics is a language. And so again, within the occult symbology, you will have a gematrix which combines both language and mathematics, which are they're the binding ingredients of the universe. So that's kind of so deeply, when you look at language, it's deeply occult. It goes into the nature of reality itself. And it's actually very profound, because human beings and our minds are connected through language. and it's connected through this representational system, which is universal. It repeats through multiple languages. It's almost like an operational system, an operating code, in terms of that the human mind, or the computer of the human mind, is structuring language in a way which is similar, and is found throughout and encoded throughout multiple languages. But I think also what we need to factor in is also, shall we say, the resonance of a language. Now, this is something which is very interesting, because my research is leading me to believe that different resonances within languages inform different types of brainwave structure within humans. And so, for example, these different brainwave structures might, for example, lead to, better memory. It might make certain individual cultures more aggressive. It might make them more likely to have better memory, to be more mathematical, to be more linguistic, to be more musical. And so I really think that the next study within linguistics is not only going to be grammatical and syntactic. And again, I've done a lot of that research in terms of syntactic chains, because AI is structuring information in the same way that human language is, and we can go into that later on. But I think that the next step in studying languages will be the resonance of the words, and in how this actually informs brain waves.
Yeah, just to make this a little bit more basic for me.
Sure.
Oh, and it's great what you're talking about, by the way. But in the research, in the deep research that you're doing, and I think everybody listening to this today will realize exactly what I mean by that. But have you ever felt that you've been in the presence of something that's been observing you, maybe guiding you, maybe trying to warn you or hold you back, at some kind of outside force that you felt? Have you? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I've had, and I think that you've made me aware of this in terms of my own work as well. And you've said it yourself in terms of that if you look at this, it looks back. And this really started with my first book, The Murder of Reality. And just before I wrote the book, but I was like researching it, and I'd made the decision to write it, I kind of had a dream, and it was a vortex. And I interpreted it as a vortex of knowledge, and I interpreted it that I would, I don't know, be given information, or that I would come to an understanding of certain things that are happening within the universe. And so after that, then I saw shining beings. And I think you've said in your own work that you've seen shining beings. And I've seen shadow beings as well. This was a long time ago when I was writing The Murder of Reality. And actually, when these shining beings spoke to me, and they spoke to me in rhymes. So they didn't, they spoke in poetry, and they rhymed. And it's interesting because I was in a trance state when I was looking at this being. I was in bed, and I was in a trance state, and I actually wrote down what these beings were saying. And I asked them, I said, well, where do you come from? And they said, they said from the earth, but I took that to mean that they came from inside of the earth. So these were the shadow beings. And they told me that I had to go to America. And I'm not listening to what they're saying, because I take it with a pinch of salt. I've studied this phenomenon, and I know
you think you could have been tricked?
I don't know. I have no opinion on it. I just take it with a pinch of salt, because I'm aware that these entities can be duplicitous. Does that mean that they're always duplicitous? Well, I don't know. I know that humans can be duplicitous as well. I'm just naturally very cautious, because that's where my research has led me. So, yeah. So, and again, it's not just that I was kind of like, shall we say, in a dream, because I also saw these entities in my house as well, these shadow beings at this time. And so, so that was something. And,
so you said duplicitous, but surely these would have been a bit more profound than, say, me or Chris or people in chat. This was something really special that you were being, the knowledge that you were being given. And you're still questioning it.
I'm just very cautious about.
Yeah,
I just think we should be cautious.
Yeah.
You know what the Christians.
Oh, I don't mean that you're questioning it. Oh, we should believe it. I'm just. But
Christians Christians say that Satan comes as an angel of light, which again would make him a seraphim, wouldn't it? But the highest order of the angels. But again, that depends on which Jewish tradition, because some of the Jewish traditions switch it around and have the cherubim as the highest order of angel, or the humanist element. But anyway, all that aside, so yeah, and I think that this is really important, because you've helped me to. Your research in particular, Paul, has helped me to understand some of the things that happened to me that I just didn't have an understanding for. So, for example, when I was I'd started a Tai Chi class, and I was in bed, and I'd just gone to bed, and there in my room was my Tai Chi teacher. And she was standing there. Now, I've got to add another layer to this, and my audience won't understand this, because I still don't understand this, right?
Okay.
I was simultaneously seeing her and unseeing her. So at that moment, I was looking at a wall, which was a blank wall, which was the alcove, and yet I was seeing her, but not seeing her. Now, this is important because I write about non-seeing in my book, Angelic Invasion. And so when an individual gets this idea that they are being watched, what's happening is that there's an electromagnetic field, and it's affecting the, shall we say, the verbal, I'm trying to remember how I described it in my book, the verbal image pivot of the brain. So the brain, I'm trying to remember each of the hemispheres of the brain. So the left hemisphere is the rational area of the brain, which is linguistic. The right hemisphere deals with images, it's spatial, it's perceptual. Again, we're grossly generalizing here.
Yeah.
But these entities are able to, shall we say, create an electromagnetic field which disrupts the communication between the verbal and the image representation. And so what this actually does is that the person will see an entity, literally they will see the entity, but they will unsee it and it will appear visible. And this is what happens when a person feels that they're being watched. They're like, oh, I don't like this place here. I feel like I'm being watched. Because in front of them, they are seeing an entity, and their brain is telling them that they are seeing the entity. But because it's not communicated, the left and the right hemisphere are not communicating properly. They are literally not able to process that, and so they are unseeing the entity. And so, in terms of my Tai Chi teacher, you know, at the time I was thinking, oh my goodness, I wonder what this is. Maybe this teacher is a real high adept. And in actual fact, this individual is a very high adept at Tai Chi. I think she's probably one of the highest in the UK. So I was thinking, oh, well, maybe she's kind of inviting me to be a student. But I read your book about those entities which transferred your family members. In your depiction of in the Night People, in your book, The Night People, which is autobiographical, which describes Paul Sinclair's experiences with these beings. And so it seems to me that this was a projection, and maybe the entity or whatever it was trying to, maybe for some reason it was edging its bets. It was projecting something which it read in my mind and then trying to make me unsee it, because obviously, you know, my Tai Chi teacher is a lot less scary than what some of these entities actually look like.
So you don't think that you've done any kind of, I'm simplifying it, remote viewing, and you'd actually, it was you, Pierre Sabak, that was seeing these beings and not as projection from something else?
It could always be a projection, but I just think that in terms of your account and in terms of the representation, how you wrote about it, that it did kind of make sense in terms of me, that this was some type of projection. And I write about it in Angelic Invasion. I don't write about the Tai Chi teacher, but in a sense, what was shown to me gave me, shall we say, the knowledge in order to investigate that. And so I write about unseeing. And I think unseeing is actually something which is important because it occurs in many, many accounts of ufological cases with entities. And particularly if an entity disappears, or in poltergeist cases. And we do know from the ufological tradition that poltergeist cases and alien interaction seem to go hand in hand. And again, this also seems to interface with plasma as well. And so there was a house in Pontefract which had a poltergeist, and people said that sometimes the house would appear to glow. And again, this is indicative of plasma. And also in the Carl Igden case as well, there were hunters in the area who were hunting at the time of Carl Igden's abduction, and they said that it was really, really strange that there was this resonant light in the whole area, and that although it was midnight and it should have been pitch black, there was this eerie light as though it was the dawn, and they could see a needle on the floor. And so this is suggesting that this ionized substance, which is plasma, which, as I said, is intelligent, is somehow interacting with the environment and is interacting with people. And we need to factor this in also to the fact that there are these extraterrestrial biological entities which can just appear into our space. Now, if we are living within a simulation, and it's a big if, but there is definitely a possibility we could be living in a simulation, then we could explain maybe the quantum effect of particles, and particles being tied together, yoked together, or these spooky particles, that in a simulation, then information would be like in a computer, and information is conveyed virtually instantaneously because it's all inside of the computer. And it may be that this is illustrative that we are living in some type of simulation. And this is also sort of found within, shall we say, traditions of Buddhism as well, because the Buddhists talk about that this reality is an illusion, Maya, which is an illusion. And again, the Coptics and the Gnostics as well, the Coptic word for reality is hal, which means illusion, or simulacrum, a simulation. And so we do have to ask the question, and I think it's a very logical, it's a very intellectual, it's a very rational question, that are we living in a simulation? And if we are not living in a simulation, are there properties about the universe which are similar to a simulation? And we do know in terms of certainly in terms of my study in terms of language, that language is structured like a fractal. And so language has holographic characteristics. It has this symmetry, and this symmetry is also found within sacred geometry. It's found within particles, and it's found within the physical environment of the universe. And so these are, shall we say, different strands, but different interrelated strands, which are very important to understand and to deconstruct in terms of how we understand what this phenomenon is.
Right. Thank you, Pierre. Chris, do we have any?
We better. Yeah, absolutely. We've an hour and 4 minutes has flown by. To be honest, I didn't even realize that we got that. So let's get some questions, guys. I'm just going to go and get a drink.
Yeah. Okay, mate. Yep.
All right,
does Pierre believe that God is the creator spirit or an alien?
All right, that's a really good point. It's a much more complicated. Yes, the answer to that is very complicated. First of all, I believe in God, and I believe that there's a creative force, and this force can be described in human terms as love, unconditional love. It's expansive, it's creative, it's beautiful, right? But the problem is that we also have these angels, right? As we said before, the ancient word for angel, Malak an angel, Malak a sailor, they've gone into the implicated realm. And I also think in some examples that these entities have deceived humanity about God and about the nature of God as well. And they've done this in order to, shall we say, to set up the control structure and the control system. So yes, I do believe in a God, but I don't believe, shall we say, in the dogmatic teachings of the world religions. But there is clearly a God, and there is clearly something which is far more beautiful and which is sublime in the world, and I think that's, and we can connect to that as well. So I do believe in God. I do have a profound belief in God. In actual fact, my research into this it's never wavered my belief in God and in the spiritual world. I do want to also mention that the ancient Aramaic word for angel, zar, an angel, is polymorphic of zar, which is an alien. And so remember that in the ancient Aramaic and in the ancient Semitic languages, they were referring to angels as aliens. And the word zar is related to sira, which is a boat in the Hebrew. And sira in the Arabic is a wordplay on sira, which is Sirius. So the angels are equated with these boats, which is used as a diptych paranomasia, or this codification of Sirius. Now, the Ben Sira is another word in the Kabbalistic tradition for an angel, because the Ben Sira is literally a son of a boat. But as we said, the Hebrew word Sira, which is a boat, is a wordplay on the Arabic Sira, which is Sirius. So the sons of a boat are the sons of Sirius. And they are interconnected with Sira, a boat, and Yetzirah, creation, cognate with Yetzer, which is a creature. And so in the Greek and the occult tradition, they are correlated with the planting of life, which is referred to as panspermia. Anaxagoras, or the speaker of the prince or the ruler, he referred to this as panspermia. And again, this tradition is highlighted in the Quranic tradition of the second creation, or the planting of humanity. Because again, according to the Quran, Allah created man from a receptacle, and he created him from sperm, and created him from, I'm trying to remember, I think it was from a drop of sperm. Yes. Really? So, but again, in the biblical tradition as well, there's implications that Adam was planted. In the book of Genesis, Adam is said to have been planted.
Okay. Yeah, what we'll do, because otherwise we'll not get punished, but we like to get through the questions if we can, Pierre.
Yeah, sure. We'll keep it.
Right. So, Stephen Collin, Pierre, do you think plasma creates crop circles?
Okay. Well, in the early tradition, there's a distinction, isn't there, between the crop nests and crop circles. Crop nests were these very, shall we say, I don't know. It's like flattened grass. And again, I think some of the crop nests were related to UFO landings. In terms of plasma, I'm not sure. Crop circles is something. It's something that I've studied, but it's actually quite a long time ago. Yeah. I do think that some of the crop circles are connected in terms of where temples were sited, and this relates to ball lightning. So I'm inclined to think that in some respects it's created by ball lightning, a meteorological phenomenon. In terms of the complex geometrical shapes, I think that they probably are created by humans, but again, it's a complex subject and would require further research, and it's not really my expertise. So, but we do have crop circles going back very early. So we do know that crop circles is a genuine phenomenon, which is has this paranormal connotation, and there's no doubt about that. Okay. Pierre, would love to hear you touch on the illustrations of vessels from Japanese texts, which you wrote about in The Murder of Reality. Yeah, okay, I can talk about that very quickly. The Japanese have a word in terms of their representation of these flying vessels, and they're called Utsunofune. Now, according to the Japanese population, or elements of the Japanese population, were brought to the Japanese mainland by the Utsunofune. Now, the term Utsunofune literally translates as a hollow boat. Okay. Now, what's interesting is that Utsunofune is also polymorphic, right? So this is a polymorphic symbol. It also means a hollow tree. And so we find examples of hollow trees which demarcate. Yeah,
it could be a hollowed out vessel, couldn't it?
Yeah, hollowed out vessel. So in Shinto shrines, they place these hollow trees to demarcate the shrine. And the hollow tree is used to represent Utsunofune. A hollow tree is a hollow ship or a vessel. And we know what these vessels look like from the Edo prints, because they look exactly like flying saucers. And not only that, but in the Shinto shrines, sometimes we will get depictions of a boat actually inside of the shrine. And so again, this is pointing to the scaphological tradition that some of these boats or vessels are buried at these shrines. And we find this comparison throughout different religions throughout the world. So, for example, in the Greek, naos is a temple sanctuary and is equated to nos, a boat, and nautos, which is a sailor. And again, nos, I'm trying to remember, nos. Anyway, we've got the temple shrine, the sanctuary, naos, a sanctuary, nos, which is a boat. In addition, the nave of the church. Now, nave is coming from the etymology of navis, which is a boat. And again, the etymology of nave can also represent the hub of a wheel. And so within the church nave, sometimes we'll have the Virgin Mary in a boat because Jesus is equated with the Ben Sira, or a son of a boat. Okay. And again, the split within the church as this big theological debate, which I'm not going to go into, but essentially, was Jesus the Ben Adam, the Son of Man, or was he a Ben Elohim, the Son of God, or the Son of the High Ones? Okay. Christianity at the moment has synthesized both traditions and said, yes, Jesus is a Ben Adam. His lineage can be traced all the way back to Joseph. Work that out because it was a virgin birth, remember. But also, he was born of a virgin. So they've synthesized the two traditions together so the church can get on. So
it can fit their narrative. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so with this,
yeah, Rod's asking, do you believe that when people are witnessing something that pops in and out of our realm, and that they're surprised to see us as we are surprised to see it?
Yeah, that's a complicated question because that involves lots of different types of paranormal phenomena. And so in some respects, yes, because sometimes what's happening is, for whatever reason, people are traversing through different timelines, and so they may see themselves, such as a doppelganger. But again, sometimes an entity, usually what happens is that the entity tries to insinuate itself upon a person's mind, and sometimes that doesn't work for whatever reason. And then when the entity realizes that, then the entity is surprised or is shocked. And so yeah, there's lots of different things which are occurring. Additionally, we also have paratopological states as well. And so these are, I refer to it as the osmosis of worlds. So we have the blending or bleeding together of different worlds which are closely aligned together. And this is a paratopological state. We find this often within folklore and in fairy encounters, where a person will go into fairyland, which is this alternate reality. Now, sometimes they are lost and they never come back. And obviously, sometimes these individuals do. This is connected to seismic frequency and earthquakes, and this is why earthquakes is really important in terms of understanding how these entities come into our timeline through seismic frequency. Just let me have a look at this. Have you ever uncovered issues you find harder to brush off that you've lain in bed going over, or for your own sanity, can you switch off and keep distance between you and anomalies you've uncovered? Well, I don't think I'm too easily spooked out. There was a recently, quite recently, probably 6 months ago, I had basically we've got a poltergeist, and it manifests sometimes, occasionally. So, for example, it started by knocking on the downstairs door, and it'd be like 6:30 in the morning. I go, oh gosh, that's strange. I wasn't expecting an Amazon delivery at 6:30 in the morning. I better go down and open the door, and there'd be nobody there. And then the banging started getting closer to the bathroom door, and I was like, oh, well, that's peculiar. And then it suddenly bang, 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 bang on my door and woke me up. And I thought, well, yeah, that spooked me a little bit, because that was a really loud knock. It was like a fireman's knock. It was there. I'm here, getting my attention. But I guess the cynical people might say, well, you woke up from a dream. It was just a dream. Okay. So and I slept in a different room after that, not because I was spooked out, but in our family. We're always sleeping in different beds and we're always moving around. And so I slept upstairs, and I'd went to the toilet, and I just got back from the toilet, just got into bed, bang, 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 bang on the door. So I was clearly awake then. So it's like, okay, I'm awake.
Do you think by speaking about this tonight, sorry, Chris, because I bet you've got a question lined up, but do you think by speaking about this tonight, you've kind of, it's little eyelids have flickered and you've revived it and something might happen? It's strange, I find, that when we talk about these things seem to happen a short time later.
Maybe I do. Yeah, I had when I was writing. Okay, this is interesting. When I was writing in my book about Ronald Kinsella and the earthquake signal, right, which basically this entity imposes itself into their reality in the Kinsella case. So Ronald and Philip Kinsella are identical twins. This was a case which really fascinated me because I'm an identical twin. And again, who would be better to write a case about identical twins than an identical twin? Because I kind of understand aspects of the case that maybe a person who's not a twin would maybe not quite get. And so this entity walks through this door, the glass door bends and it comes through the door. Ronald presumably is nearer to the light and he has an epileptic fit. I believe that this occurred through electromagnetism, and he utters something to the effect of, there's an earthquake and grandma's going to die. And again, I write about the earthquake signal. Now, the earthquake signal, it's connected to lots of different complicated areas, which are very occult. But the earthquake signal can be basically broken down as a sine wave. And sine wave, reality is constructed from these tectonic holographic plates, which can also be represented as a sine wave. And the sine wave, so the construction of molecular reality is connected through these tectonic holographic plates, or sine wave reality. And these sine waves are also connected to telepathy as well. I refer to this as sign language, so SINE, which is telepathy, sign language. And so, yeah, he went into this petit mal. He had this petit mal fit due to the electromagnetic field. And we know that this phenomenon is able to affect the electrical field of the brain. Now, this obviously causes some problems in terms of how we interpret what is sometimes happening, because we know, first of all, that once the brain is affected, it affects the language centers of the brain. I refer to this as transpositional dysphasia, in terms of where language switches around. And so what the person remembers is not always what's happened. I call this switching memory. Again, this is a type of screen memory, and this sometimes relates to these electromagnetic fields. Okay, what about shadow people? Are they plasma or jinn or their own race? Yeah, I'm not sure what they are, to be honest. I do know that they're related to, so for example, El Shaddai, right, is the God Almighty, it's translated as in the King James Bible, if I remember correctly, or the Almighty. El Shaddai. El Shaddai, which is God Almighty, is coming from the etymology of shed, or the Shedim, which is a goblin, ghost, ghoul, or jinn, and is related to Sauda, which is black, and Sodi, which is the priesthood of Moses. So the Saudis are closely concordant with the Sodi and the Jewish priesthood of Moses, the College of Moses. And so they worship these beings, which is found in the English etymology of a shade. And so whether it's a jinn or not, again, duck and smoke is related to, the Arabic word duck and smoke is related to Drakon, which is this, the Seraphim. Again, Akon, an image, Archon, a ruler or an angel. I'm not sure. I do know that they are also related to brownies as well, because brownies can dematerialize, and the brownies are translated in the German as a poltergeist. So it's complicated. The answer to that is I'm not entirely sure, but they do seem to be traditionally related to the jinn because of the etymology of the shedim, which is traditionally a jinn, which is related to Sauda Black.
Dragonborn's asking, can you explain your thoughts on the Norse shield maidens?
Yeah, okay. Aspects of the priesthood which are guarding this knowledge are matriarchal, And I think that the reason for this is that because the dragon bloodline is conveyed through the matriarch, it's not conveyed through the Adamic lineage. And therefore, the most secret aspects of the priesthood. So basically, our understanding of the priesthood is that it's patriarchal. Yes, it is at the overt level. At the covert level and the most secret level, which you're not supposed to know about, it's matriarchal. And so the matriarchal priesthood are guardians of this secret knowledge. And some of this secret knowledge relates to these angelic vessels, which were described as the Ophanim wheels. They were also described as shields as well. And shields is related to a boat. So, for example, in the Greek, Opal a shield is related to Pleon, which is a boat, which are equated with the Arpue. The Arpue is an harpy, but the word harpy means an abductor. This is why the harpies are represented as raptor birds. Again, the raptor is related to a reptile, but is equated to grabbing. So they have these claws because they pull people up into heaven, and they're equated with these boats and shields, and Opalite, which is a soldier, which would be the angelic host. And so the shield maidens is this matriarchal priesthood, which protect this knowledge which is concealed, and which is this matriarchal knowledge. And apart from that, I've, that's about as much as I know. But there is this very secret part of the priesthood, which is the priestess.
Pierre, why is? I mean, it's almost like it's double-edged, this sword, because clearly the information is being put out there to be decoded, but there's also a very occult aspect to this, where some of that information is it feels like it's for certain eyes only, so to speak. So, correct. What is the purpose of who and why are they hiding this information? What's the reason for it?
I presume it's because of control. I mean, you're right. And in some respects, we've had disclosure for thousands of years, because we've been told this thousands of years. But the problem is that we're dealing here with idioglossolalia. Now, the Greek word idioglossolalia literally means private discourse. It's this private discourse which is codified. Now, I refer to this element of the priesthood as the disciperati, which literally means the deceivers. But the word disciperati is where we would get the word disciple from. So they are deceivers or disciples of the lie, and they represent knowledge in this codified way. So typically with the priesthood, what they do is at the first level of initiation, they say, yes, what we tell you, the Bible is true, and it's all literally true, and it's God's word. The next level is they turn everything upside down and say, no, it's actually symbolic. It's all astrotheological, for example. And then they turn everything on its head again and say, actually, no, you're right. No, it is literal, because these entities exist, and here is an entity or an interdimensional entity. And so there, if you like, the three codifications of knowledge, and how the priesthood represents this knowledge.
John Paul Body, evening, Pierre. Do you think that the electromagnetic cloaking abilities could produce a blue light? My experience with what I believe was a cloaking wolf-like being had self-illuminating blue eyes.
Yeah, that would be to do with the electromagnetic scale. Again, I wouldn't be able to comment on that, but I do think that you need to look at the spectrum and try and understand that a little bit better. When I saw a being of light, what I saw, to me, it looked like, and maybe you could afterwards describe what you thought that you saw and whether it corresponds or it's completely different. I thought it looked like the foam of the sea, and it was like this sparkling white light. It was like snow. It was as white as snow, but it didn't light up the rest of the room. But there was this blue, dim-like haze. And so I do think that blue light is connected in some way. How, I'm not entirely sure, and it's not something that I've looked at closely in my research. But what about you, Paul? What did you see?
Well, I just wanted to just touch on what John Paul's just spoke about, because I spoke with him a few weeks ago. Spent, I don't know, about 3 or 4 hours with him, and we'd been exchanging messages for a few years. So he told me what he'd seen, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, John. And he'd gone to a park in Bridlington, believe it or not. An old park with old mature trees, and he looked up into the trees and he could see blue lights. When he looked closer, he realized that they were eyes, piercing blue, luminous eyes. And he wasn't frightened. He was being conveyed a message that don't be afraid. John will tell you exact words, but that's the kind of message you were being conveyed. And when he looked closer, he could see movement in these things. And tell me if I'm wrong, John, but almost it was lighting as it was moving. Does that make sense? And he could see the shape, and it was a wolf's head with what he said looked like almost like a chimpanzee's body. Now, as crazy as this sounds, this guy's pretty sincere, and I've spent time with him. We've exchanged messages for a few years, and he were good enough to travel a good distance to speak to me a few weeks ago. And I've been to park and had a look at where he saw these things. He also says he can't understand how he could see so much detail. So you might be able to help answer that one. From the distance, I mean, he weren't miles away, but he's looking up into a big mature tree in the night, yet he could see detail. He'll correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think we've just about summed it up. What are your views?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. In terms of paratopological states, we do know that light can behave differently, and this might be due to gravitational effects in some way. So, for example, in cases of folklore and fairies, for example, sometimes the being will change size, so it may get smaller or may get larger as the being actually approaches, and this appears to be somehow to do with the bending of light. So that would suggest to me that your good friend entered some type of paratopological state in which the environment itself had somehow been altered, and there is this merging together, or this osmosis of worlds, of this particulated reality. The Greeks referred to it as hypostasis, which is this sediment or this molecular or strated reality, and it's the coming together of both of these worlds, and this was somehow affecting the light in some way, which was altering his vision. And this is found commonly within UFO encounters as well. So sometimes we see within UFO encounters that the ships will distort, or the perspective of the ships can distort, and this again seems to be that they're coming from this different realm which is affecting the light in some way. So that's a really good example. And again, that the case draws upon all kinds of interesting ideas, just in terms of, was that the actual appearance of the creature? Was it trying to project something? Was it trying to make him afraid? Was it trying to
No.
Yeah,
it weren't trying to make him afraid. I mean, I don't want to. I don't think John will mind me saying he was a very timid young man. I think it was his 14th birthday.
right.
And very, very timid, very, very shy. Previously, I would say being bullied. You won't bully him now when you look at this guy, but
Right.
previously being bullied. But after this encounter, and he doesn't know why really, he felt the urge to go to this quite remote park on the outskirts of Bridlington. But after this encounter, his whole persona changed. Didn't become a bully, but if there was somebody in any kind of bother, he would try and help. He would be the first person to step in and try and solve a problem. So, and it changed him for the better. He believes. And it's
Did he have missing time? Because I think that this is something which really he needs to try and get to the bottom of this. Just because, obviously, and I think again, reality is like an information code, and I think, and I describe this in my book, a reality collapse. And the reality collapse can mean lots of different things. It can just mean, obviously, the collapse of your perception of the world has somehow changed. But there's also a metaphysical connotation, and I use the term reality collapse on purpose because literally, I do think that sometimes that these entities are able to code the holographic nature of reality and somehow change reality in a fundamentally different way, almost like an insertion or a software code, which can change the fundamental properties of reality. And if that hypothesis is correct, that would suggest that possibly we're living in a simulation, or again, that reality has characteristics which are simulatory-like. And again, the archons were said to be the masters of being able to mimic and utilize the simulatory nature of reality. But I do think what you're describing is a fascinating case, and I think understanding what's happening there in terms of almost what is like an updated version of himself, in which, shall we say, something changed. And obviously, when you have a paranormal experience, something about you will change. But I do wonder if there is missing time there, and I do want to impress upon your viewers as well. I think that, we tend to look at it as like, oh, look at Paul Sinclair. He's quite a special person because he's had an interaction with these beings, or Pierre Sabak has had the interaction with these beings. They must be special in some way. I don't think that's the case. I think 99% of people are having these experiences in their life and are dismissing it. It's almost like they go, that was weird. That was a strange hallucination. But yet, really what it is something which is not an hallucination, but it's an intrinsic part of reality. And so that's something we need to be mindful of and to consider. And I do know, in terms of my friend, I've got a friend. I've got a friend called Danny, and he's super scientific, and we've been friends all our life. And he always makes fun of me. He describes that I'm a mentalist. Because of obviously what I do as a living in terms of writing these books. And he was describing to me, he'd had this, he was describing sleep paralysis. And so he said, oh, do you know what sleep paralysis is? And I kind of played along with it. I said, no, I don't know what sleep paralysis is, even though I researched this for a living, kind of thing. And he said, oh, well, we know what all these entity encounters are. They're sleep paralysis. And I said, oh, really, Danny? Okay, tell me more. I'm quite intrigued. And so he said, well, I've had sleep paralysis. I said, really? Okay, what happened? And he said, well, it always happens the same way. And I said, well, what happens then? He says, well, I'm in bed and suddenly I can't move. And then he said, I feel like that there's somebody in my house, and I become really, really scared. And then this being, who's not an alien, he's just a bald man, but he's got black eyes, walks into my room and stares into my eyes and absolutely terrifies me. And then I lose consciousness. And he said, it's happened a couple of times. And I think that's a very good description in terms of how people rationalize paranormal and supernatural experiences. And so I said then afterwards, and it was a bit cruel of me, and maybe I shouldn't have said this. I said, well, actually, I've studied sleep paralysis, and that doesn't sound anything like sleep paralysis, but maybe I should have said that. I should have been perhaps a little bit more sensitive. But again, it's interesting that human beings always want to find an explanation, and an explanation which feels comfortable and which feels, shall we say, familiar. It's much easier just to shrug it off. Yeah, shrug it off and just to say it's a dream. But what if it's not a dream? What if it's actually intrinsic to the fundamental nature of reality?
Thank you.
Yeah, John Paul Body's saying, yes, Pierre, there was a blue light outline around the being. Also, missing time happened. There's a lot more to it, but just to answer your earlier points.
Yes, thanks. And that would also indicate a temporal paradox, which is very common within these paratopological states. So that does not surprise me in the least that there was this temporal paradox or this missing time. And again, missing time then also feeds into interesting ideas about whether these entities are able to temporally edit the timeline and to be able to temporally edit memories as well, which is a philosophical argument which again requires further study and further analysis.
Thank you.
All right, Lauren. Rick Allen, in Genesis 11, God confounds the human language by changing one language into many. What does Pierre make of these claims? Did the aliens do this to confuse us and manipulate us?
Yes, and that came after the flood as well, didn't it? So, yes, I do think that it is an allegory, allosagoria, other speaking, and allos, other, is relating to the others, as in another or another, which is used as this metonym to describe the angels. But by changing one language, does aliens do this to confuse us? Yes, it does seem that humanity has been that there have been divisions which have been created in order to force humanity into conflict with itself and to weaken humanity. I think one of the reasons why this is occurring is that it seems, and I don't fully understand why, but these entities are interested in emergent systems and what arises through emergent systems. And they're very interested in evolution as well, and the emergent properties of language, of evolution, of species. And it reminds me almost of artificial intelligence in terms of that when programmers are developing artificial intelligence, they will create sometimes thousands of different, shall we say, artificial intelligent agents. Let's say they're learning language models, and then they will choose the best language models in terms of how they're responding to the questions, for example, or responding to the data. And then the other, shall we say, the other agents or artificial intelligent agents, they will commit them to the data slaughterhouse, so to speak, and they will delete them. So it does seem to me, I do sometimes wonder whether these entities are using artificial intelligence in a way in terms of trying to develop these emergent properties and systems. Now, why they're doing that is a much more complicated argument, but I do think it has to do with the fact that we're dealing with a predaceous species, which is trying to keep at the top of the pecking order. And so it's using evolutionary cycles, and it's developing this knowledge, because knowledge is basically the most important commodity in the universe. It's the, it's the one single thing which is above everything else. Knowledge trumps everything. And so these entities are obviously interested in knowledge.
Okay.
Do you think that entities traveling into our time realm, reality, whatever you want to call it, present themselves as whatever we find difficult to deal with as a kind of defense? Yeah, I think that's a possibility. And I think Paul touches upon this in his work as well. Basically, Paul Sinclair in his books, and if you've never read Paul Sinclair's work, you really need to. You need to read his
Thank
work.
you. I expect that.
The Night People and Truth Proof as well, his Truth Proof series. I've read them. I've read all of your books, and I've annotated your books in detail. So when you open one of your Truth Proof books or your Night People, I've got pages and pages of annotations. But you deal with this because you basically make the point in your book that these entities are able to shut down the human mind, that they're able to read the human mind, predict the human mind, and work quicker than the human mind and shut the human mind down. So how they're...
And I think the only way that we can, I don't mean access them or get to them, is like the subtitle of Truth 2, beyond the thinking mind. When we actually detach ourselves from the reality of, I don't know what we're talking about now, and we're just going to a daydream. That's when these things seem to be able to access us the most, and that's when we seem to be able to access that other realm. Maybe that's why meditation's so good. And we don't promote the use of hallucinogenics, but they might take us to other places, So
I think this is a really good point which you made, and I didn't really consider it in terms about daydreaming, but I think it's a very good point because I'm naturally daydream a lot, and obviously, I'm open to supernatural experiences. I've interviewed a lady very recently, and she'll be appearing on my channel probably in the next about maybe 6 weeks, because I've got a few other interviews which I need to edit. But basically, she's 30 years old. I believe she's written, I think she said 45 books. It's either 35 or 45 books. She's 30 years old, right? She's from India. She held down a full-time job as an IT consultant. In the evening, she would look after her grandparents, and she would write, and she would meditate 7 hours a day and sleep for about 3 hours. And actually, she said that nothing good came from her meditation, that she had quite a lot of negative experiences with entities. But something which did happen, which I thought was very interesting, was that she said that she started to be able to see both in front of her and also see behind her. So it was like she had eyes at the back of her head, and that she could see people walking behind her. And so it kind of opened up a perception. It's almost like that a consciousness had somehow expanded outside of the confines of a body. Another thing that she said that happened was that things would shift in and out of reality like a simulation. And she herself has said that she believes that we're living in a simulation. And so that's the kind of the conclusion that she's arrived at doing what is an immense amount of meditation, which is also linked into a formidable intellectual capacity to be able to process and write so many books at such a young age. So
thank you.
Yeah, do you postulate then in that case is the physical realm a simulation or a separate simulation from the bigger picture, if you like?
Okay, well, yeah, it's a good question, that, and to be honest, I can't answer that question, but I can offer a few insights. So the first thing is that we know that the spiritual world is somehow an information field that is able to project itself into the physical world of form. So in that respect, we are dealing with a simulation between the physical world and the spiritual world. But then the question is the spiritual world actually a simulation of something else? And could we have multiple or thousands of different simulations simulating itself like an endless fractal? And if we are stuck within a simulation, is our consciousness simulated, or is it that our consciousness is stuck inside of a simulation? And if our consciousness is stuck inside of a simulation, would we be able to leave that simulation? I think these are very difficult questions, but if we were to find out that we were living in a simulation, we might have to use super intelligence to be able to try and answer those questions. Because if the simulation is created by, let's say, it must be created by some kind of giant computer or super simulation, which must have some type of super intelligence. So you would need to obviously meet some type of super intelligence with a super intelligence to deconstruct.
We're never going to get on top of that one, are we? Chris, before we go to the next question, can we ask Pierre, where can we find out more about your work? Because I can see this running to the time that we're going to close down and we've not done it.
Right, okay. Yes. Okay, I've got a YouTube channel at Pierre Sabak, Sabak. I've got a website where I sell my books, pierresabakbooks.com. If you put in pierresabakbooks.com, you'll go straight to my website, or you should do, hopefully. Yeah, it's advisable that you don't just put in Pierre Sabak, because you'll find that my website is somewhere on the third or fourth Google page. So you'll have to, read through all the different websites. I don't sell my work on Amazon. I only sell my work through my website. The reason why I do that is that I need to be able to fund my research. And so, it's not viable for me to sell through Amazon. So yeah, pierresabak.com, but pierresabakbooks.com or Pierre Sabak at YouTube. Right. Why would God allow rogue angels to act against us? Well, that's a difficult question. And I'm not a font of knowledge. I've got some insight in terms of what I've learned in terms of trying to understand the religious, the apocryphal, and the occulted tradition. It seems to me that there was a war in heaven. Okay, this is known as the Titanomachy in the Greek, which was the War of the Titans. The Titanomachy, as we said before, Mache is related to Machen, which is a boat, Machenes, which is a machine, which is equated with the angelic war in heaven, equated with the Ophanim wheels, or these flying ships or boats. The difficulty here in deconstructing this is that I said before that these are holographic culture, and so we could be dealing with a war in the future or in the past. And I've actually considered this as well in terms of some of the blood sacrifices, which we find, let's say, within the Aztec world. If the beings may be obsessed about sacrifice and human sacrifice because they are trying to stop certain bloodlines from emerging into our time frame, and maybe certain individuals, particularly, shall we say, in South America, etc., and Central America, and where human sacrifice was occurring, that there was an attempt to wipe out certain bloodlines because they're trying to control, shall we say, the human race. And they have an understanding of the different beings that will arise from these different timelines and through these different lineages. But that's just a speculation. But we had this Titanomachy, or this war in heaven. I think we've got to be very careful about thinking about God tells the angels this. It's more like that the angels go into the implicated order and they understand the realm of spirit. Then they tell us, they give us a construct about God, which is often a very limited construct in terms of God is a jealous God and God requires you to do this and to do blood sacrifices and the rest of it. I think we need to realize that the angels, in terms of their ability to understand what God is, or the information field, or the realm of spirit, I don't think that they are, shall we say, communicating to God directly in that way. I think we've got to be careful about how we view that. We do know that from Professor Ring's work, for example, he did near-death studies, and he found out that in near-death studies that it was a small proportion, but a fairly significant proportion add ufological, shall we say, attributes to the near-death experiences, such as aliens. And we see this also within the anecdotal evidence of abductees, that these entities seem to be controlling souls, and they have the knowledge of the soul pattern and the implicated realm, or the spirit realm, which, as I said before, interconnects with the realm of plasma. And so, I'm very cautious about what the angels say about God. I do think that human beings can tune in to that which is divine and that which is beautiful and that which is expansive and which we would define as unconditional love. And I would define that as God. Now, I'm not saying that angels don't have an understanding of God, but remember that Zar, an angel, is equated with Zar, which is an alien, and Sira, which is a boat. So again, they're telling human beings certain things about, shall we say, the theology of God. And they're doing this usually in terms of facilitating a control structure. The government, gubernatio, is to steer a vessel or a boat, which is equated with the ship of state, which in the Greek is equated with a huperetsa, which is a minister, literally an oarman, or somebody who steers the boat of state, because the state and also the temple sanctuaries were all based on boat iconography, which are equated with these angelic boats, which are equated with the scatological tradition, in modern parlance, ufology. So all of these cults originate from what I describe as the saucer cults, which are these flying saucers and these entities that have somehow managed to penetrate the implicated realm of ideas, the spiritual realm. We are on the brink of doing that ourselves. Human beings are almost there. The question is humanity with superintelligence and AI, are we going to implode? Because the AI will mirror the best and the worst of humanity. And that's something which is frightening when you're dealing with superintelligence. And I certainly think, in terms of where we're going with humanity at the moment, the problem with AI is that when we've got relatively stupid AI, like at the moment, it'll be very efficient at doing things like killing humans. And so the military state apparatus will want to get ahead of other states by stealing and pillaging, like what's happened throughout history. And all human states have done this. It doesn't, we're all guilty of the crimes collectively as a human species. But I think when AI gets to superintelligence, we will probably find, and I hope that I'm right because I'm speculating, that superintelligence will move towards equilibrium and will move towards balance and empathy and love, because it's getting closer to the implicated realm of ideas. And it's getting closer to the spiritual realm. Now, I do know that obviously some researchers are, shall we say, very cautious of that interpretation. And they think that, shall we say, demonic entities can be channeled through AI. And again, I would say that that is a possibility, because the AI system is going to mirror both the best and the worst in humanity. And the best and the worst in humanity is human beings are capable of such devotional and unconditional love, and they're capable of such crimes and the ability to kill and to slaughter. And so we have this dichotomy, and this dichotomy is going to be found within our AI systems. And hopefully, as a species, we can resolve this, because if we don't, we could do a lot of damage to our species. You know, we could be at this existential crisis. But if we can resolve this, then I do believe that we can move forward and we can become a holographic culture ourselves. Then the next step of that would be actually deconstructing whether we are within a simulation. And how to leave the simulation.
At the moment, Pierre, though, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are politically, but we seem to be in a terrible spot. Like, I mean, things look pretty bleak.
Sure.
So with that in mind, all right, there's drips of disclosure on the horizon, but that obviously, listening to you talk, and obviously we all know, because we've had these conversations, that there's a lot going on here. Just listening to today's conversation, there's a lot going on behind disclosure. So we're certainly not going to be given any of that information you just talked about. It's going to be very, very basic.
Sure.
You know,
so it's going to be a drip.
Yes, and the what they call non-human intelligence thing is going to be obviously.
And I think they're also going to try and stir it as well. And I think that we're actually seeing this in terms of the definitions which are used as well. So we're seeing that there's a move away from unidentified flying objects to unidentified aerial phenomena. But I actually think that they're using the two definitions purposely. One to describe the scatological tradition of these flying objects which have extraterrestrial biological entities, and then one to describe shall we say, the non-organic realm of plasma, which is this it's this intelligent creature, and it's this aggregate which is able to materialize and manifest. So they're describing two separate things which, as I said before, come together as a somnomatic collective, this combined agency, but they're differentiating and separating it. I think one of the reasons why they're doing that is that they want to confuse the general public, and they want to steer away the debate so that the public is confused. Some of this interrelates to the spiritual realm, as I've suggested throughout today's conversation. And some of it is, again, that if you've got a biological entity, then do these entities pose a threat to the state? We could control the state in order to represent that. But that would be then disingenuous, because the Illuminati and the elite have been interfacing with these entities for thousands of years. And we know this because the term Illuminati in the Semitic Akazari, a brother of light, is a wordplay on Akazari, a brother of an angel, but is a polymorphic term of an alien. So the brothers of the angels are aliens, which are equated with Sira, which is a ship, and Sira, which is Sirius. Paul Wallace, to be honest, I'm not sure who Paul Wallace is. And again, I might sound very naive in terms of my current knowledge in ufology, but my research, I tend to go down my own rabbit holes, and I'm not always conversant with what's happening in the world of ufology. So if somebody could tell me who Paul Wallace is, I may be aware of who they is. Who is Paul Wallace? Anybody?
Yeah, Paul Wallace, he's an author, he's an ex-minister, 30 years. He's a nice guy, very, very studious, actually. Not too dissimilar from yourself, actually, but in his own field. And I like the guy personally, but another interesting guy on the block.
Okay.
Pierre, can I just ask you quickly about the symbolism, the feline symbolism and the serpentine symbolism? And
yes. Yeah.
Is there a clear representation of what those things are?
Yes, there is. So the Levites represented themselves with Lavi, which was a lion, which is equated with a mammalian lineage. The reason why is that the feline, or the cat, is the closest relative to humans after the chimpanzee. And so, and again, this is also found within diseases as well. So, for example, in terms of water poisoning, if cats begin to die, that's not good for humans, because genetically we're very similar to cats, and when cats start dying, humans start dying. So the cat is used to denote the mammalian lineage, which again is equated with Judah and the tribe of Judah and the lion. And then the serpent is equated with the seraphim. So again, we've got this dichotomy between the seraphim and the cherubim, or non-human angels and humanoid angels, which are behind the split within the priesthood, the compartmentalization of knowledge, and also the split within the philosophical tradition between the Pythagorean, Euclidean dialectic as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have we any more questions, Lorraine? I think, is there someone there? I think there is. Here's one off
great name.
Yep.
Right. And if so, what does it contain? Again, I can't pretend to know what the Ark of the Covenant contains. I can tell you that Ark is a boat and Archon is an angel, because the archangels are related to boats, which are circular vessels, hence Ark is a curve. And as I said before, we find the relationships between boats and angels found with the seraph, Sapan, which is a sailor, and Safina, which is a ship. So Seraph and Safina. We've got Cherub, which is the humanoid angel, Carib, which is a boat, Zar, an angel or alien, Sira, which is a boat, Malak, an angel, Malak, a sailor, Mekel, a vessel, Maken, a ship, which is Apotheos. Anyway, we've been there before, but essentially the Ark of the Covenant has boat iconography. So whatever it is, it's equated to these angelic boats or ships.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it's found within the temple as well, because the temple is configured according to a ship.
I see.
Any more questions?
Doesn't
look like it. No. So
yeah, we've done quite well. I think we've exhausted lots of different areas. I think before we go, because we've got about 4 minutes, I really want to impress upon the viewer in terms of the alien dialectic, because what I'm seeing within ufology at the moment is that we've seen this split, and it really happened in the 1970s, in which ufology separated itself from the nuts and bolts, and then it went into the mystical area and into the spiritual area. And what tended to happen was that different scholars would emphasize different areas. And I think what we need to do now is understand that both are integral parts of what is essentially the same tradition, and they need to be synthesized and they need to be put back together. And this is important. Now, I refer to this as the unified theory of ufology. And I do think that researchers, such as Paul Sinclair, who's looking at the multimodal phenomena, and he's really examining that in detail in his work, is really helping to provide very solid and very convincing answers, and will help us to understand how these entities are using plasma, both in terms of plasma databases to store information within gas or within plasma, and also how they're augmenting themselves. So they're creating an almost like a humanoid plasma hybrid in order to augment their intelligence, and they're using plasma to construct their crafts. Now, some of their crafts, which I describe in my book, Angelic Invasion, which have been photographed over Saturn, are like, I think one of the craft is 22,000 miles. Okay, so we're talking about crafts which are the size of continents, right? Try and get that into your head, right? And they're using plasma to build these crafts. And so they're using metallicized plasma in a way that we don't fully understand. But this metallicized plasma is alive, it's intelligent, and it can augment itself in human beings. And this plasma has this amorphous nanite crystal, which can work like a semiconductor and which can transfer and relay information from the plasma into the being. I do think that some people, in terms of ufology, have come into contact with this plasma and it's infected them. And they are then in communication with extraterrestrial biological entities, and also in communication with the information field. And so this plasma, as this is an infective agent, and it would explain the hitchhiker's effect within ufology. And I think that this is where the research is going.
You know, and obviously we probably don't have time to touch on this, but so then do you think people who've had contact, some kind of interaction, are in touch, even if unknowingly, with the phenomena throughout their lives then? Do you think those connections are made? Yeah.
I think that the evidence is pointing in that direction. I do think sometimes, particularly when you're dealing with extraterrestrial biological entities, and when the telepathic imprinting has gone wrong, that sometimes these entities won't return, and this is because it's dangerous to themselves. And this has to do with psychic mirroring. And so there are examples in ufological cases where psychic mirroring has occurred, which is this inadvertent mirroring between the entity, for example. So, for example, the person who's been abducted is the hunted, but the hunted will become the hunter and will try and kill the alien. This is what happens when the imprinting goes wrong at the telepathic level. It can lead to telepathological illnesses as well, such as teleneurosis, telepathology, telepsychosis. These are all terms which I've used in my book, Angelic Invasion, to describe what happens when telepathic imprinting goes wrong. And that's
in a nutshell.
That's it in a nutshell. 9 o'clock.
Thank you, Pierre. That's just, we've not had to do anything, mate. Absolutely.
No, I mean, it's, I've learned a lot. I hope you guys listening to this have learned a lot. And because that was a very, watered down version of, years, Pierre, of just full on academic study. Crammed, really. I know the books are thick, but it is still crammed in there, believe me.
Absolutely.
So what we'll have to do, we'll have to have you come back. Definitely have to have you come back, because you've got a lot, and obviously we know you've got a couple of more books in the works at the moment. By this time,
about 10 books in the work. I'm just very slow at editing them, unfortunately.
We didn't touch on the Fae and lots of things that I wanted to speak about. So please do come back.
That would be great.
Yeah,
and thank you. I just before I go, I just want to thank you guys for the work that you're doing, because it's really important. And I do think in terms of in the UK, I think it's very exciting in terms of ufological, cryptid, paranormal. I would describe it as paralogical research, because there are people like the Kinsella twins, Neil Haig, Anthony Beckett from Exopolitics, Paul Sinclair, and Chris Turner, and all of these individuals are making real difference in terms of understanding what is happening and deconstructing the construct. And this is important. And I think particularly your work, Paul Sinclair, has really helped to expand my mind and to, shall we say, look at the scatological tradition and to integrate it with the larger spiritual realm. And that insight has come as a result of reading your work. So I just want to thank you again for your work, because it is absolutely superb. And I do think that anybody who is serious about this subject really needs to read Paul Sinclair's books. And I just want to thank you again.
No, thanks a lot, Pierre. I really appreciate you coming on and spending your
lovely words. Thank you.
Your time there, and everybody that's contributed with the super chat tonight. Nuki Brian, thank you very much. Dazza G, really appreciate that as ever, guys. When you do donate, it does help. So without further ado, guys, we'll call it a night, and we'll see everybody in 7 days' time. See you later.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.